seem to be a bit late, but we'll get started soon. Okay, thank you.
So that's something interesting. Chinese thing.
But I mean, it looks like it, again, from what I read, and even I'm no great expert on this reading the news, it's become a little more controversial.
So what we say about the policy, okay, everything is completely sure. So there are pros and cons. So it also brings some advantages. There are some pitfalls as well. Position on, and that is the issue.
Fiscal shortfall.
So what I'm looking at, that's obviously, but it depends.
And also, again, more broadly, I'm sure it's become every day some kind of plot, there's some kind of a dark design. The Chinese are out there. But you see, whether that is true or not, unfortunately, the Chinese they engender the suspicion and that especially here, because people say, oh, these are the Americans, why do we have to have them? These are the world yeah, certainly. It will be quite interesting.
You can find
I know
Well, you're not.
okay.
I'm sure we'll fix this.
Yeah, okay.
We need to do something.
Okay.
This is the voice.
Yeah.
The general system. And by now, yes, you should.
So what do I will. Okay.
She's the one, the registrar is the one who registers.
Right, okay. On the list. Okay, I know, but what's all right. Okay, so do you want me to? Okay. That's what I was asking.
It's same as like further
So, well, I used to good. I'm glad. Because Yeah. Hello? Well, who knows? Definitely we're not maxed out. My students have been before. So that's not, well.
Are we having a meeting?
Okay.
That'll be next week. I will. Oh, good. Okay, good. Okay. Good.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think? Shall we get started? Otherwise, it gets a bit late. If I may, just a very quick point of order, just for my students, for the International Corporations class. You saw the sign upstairs. We're here. We're not doing the exam, and therefore it will be a take-home exam that I will send you via Learning. Okay? So don't worry about it. We'll do that, but not tonight. I'm very happy that you are here so that we can enjoy the presentation and this opportunity to hear from an important expert on a subject that is not the same as transnational corporations, but let's say that there is a connection. Anyway, to make it very, very quick, you know me, I'm the president. My name is Paolo Conchira. I'm the president of the Global Policy Institute, at the same time, also the chair of the International Relations and Political Science program here at BAU. So we're very happy to work together with our faculty. We at GPI, Denise is here, and Charles is here, who also works with us at GPI, so who really were instrumental in putting together this GPI exchange event. And we're really looking forward to learn something new about about urban policies, and indeed, urbanization. If you don't know it, you should know it. Is the key quite often, in most cases, historically, at least, to economic development. So the question is, how do we do this? And can we do this in a more organized and constructive way, or build large-scale slums, essentially? Anyway, for this and more, I leave it to our moderator, please.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Paolo. Welcome, everybody, my students and our guests. So welcome to my public policy course. I would like to remind the rules of the course that students and guests have to ask very tough questions to the presenter, right? Otherwise, the presenter will ask you very tough questions, so please be really aware of the rules. So I met Naveed in Pakistan in 2012 during my assignment for the World Bank, and since then we've been in touch. We also do research together. He's soon to be a PhD. So he came to present us his most recent research. Please be aware that I posted the link on It's Learning. Please provide feedback on this event and how we can extend this discussion. Over to you.
Thank you, Shabnam. Thank you, Paolo, for providing me this opportunity. So we are going to talk about cities and urbanization, and particularly with the question that how can we make cities more competitive? And I come to it that why this question is important. And not only where we are sitting right now in the United States, but across the world, that is an important question for policymakers, for academics, for scholars as well, researchers. So I'll come to it later. So the very first thing that I want to share with you that there have been many researchers and scholars, and what they've been trying to do that they've been trying to know that when did the humanity start living in cities actually. So there were economists out there, anthropologists, historians, and so many scholars. And finally, they have converged to the point that it was 8,000 BC when humanity figured out one of the greatest innovations that we need to live in cities. And when I say cities, it means dense settlements. And because earlier they were relying more on hunting and these things, so scholars have figured out that agriculture techniques improved, and that was actually the reason they started living together.
and some of them actually went to the villages to do agriculture, to feed these cities as well. So that process that humanity started in 8000 BC. So what happened in 2010, actually there were 3 billion people living in cities, and that make 50% of the total global population, and the humanity. So this is an interesting time in a way. That's why people call that this is an urban century. This is the century where we have reached at 50% urbanization, the project that humanity started 10,000 years ago. So here is the question that Shabnam told me, that there are some students. So what happened, that it took 10,000 years to send 3.5 billion people to cities. So now I have a question for you, that if we have to make that number 3.5, 7 billion, if we imagine 7 billion people living in cities, then how long will it take? So considering it took 10,000 years to send 3.5 billion people in cities, any student from Shabnam's class? How long will it take? How many centuries? How many thousand years? We took 10,000 years.
Something.
Any idea?
Something.
30 years.
How many?
30 years.
30 years. I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting maybe 100 centuries. You're a genius. So anyhow, that will not take longer. Actually, that will only take 50 years from 2010. So what it happened in 10,000 years is that's going to happen in 50 years. And in this 21st century, there will be an addition of 5 billion people to cities across the world. And out of that 5 billion, 3 billion are going to come in Asia alone. 3 billion China, India, South Asia. So these countries are going to send 3 billion people. So some people will migrate from rural to urban, and some of them will increase due to natural growth rate of population in those cities. So that's why this century, that is going to happen in this century is actually the 21st century. So after this century, the urbanization process will stop actually in the world. So that what is going to happen in this century, that miracle will happen, and the growth rate that we are going to face this century, like we will never face that growth rate, because we will reach at the threshold level. Like the developed world, some of them have already reached at 80% urbanization, 90% urbanization, and that's the maximum that other than if you are Singapore or Hong Kong. So countries can only do if you are not a city state. Like in Turkey, Turkey has reached, I'll share with you, Turkey has reached at 75% urbanization. And what, scholars predict that there is not going to be, more urbanization in Turkey. So in a way that, that I'll talk more about it. What does it mean when we talk about Turkey urbanization? So what are actually competitive cities? There are many, definitions. This one definition came about by the World Bank, and they talked about if a city is actually facilitating its forms, then it's a competitive city. That's the crux of the definition. And they recently did a study, and they analyzed 750 cities across the world in their report on competitive cities. And they found out that 75% of job creation in these cities were by the private sector. And the key message that the report gave actually, that city leaders need to, be familiar with the factors that help to attract, retain, and expand the private sector. So what is key in that message? They didn't talk about prime ministers or presidents actually. They talked about city leaders. So that is going to be a new generation of leaders in the world that we have already been seeing in some countries, that these are the leaders who will be at the forefront in the development agenda, and those will be city leaders actually. So that's why that report talked about. And they talked about this is how competitive cities will look like. And then similarly, there are other competitive World Economic Forum definition. They also came up with their own definition. And they said that cities need to, take care of their institutions, and they need to, improve their policies and regulations, their infrastructure, and their soft connectivity, what we call education system, social capital in their cities, and that's how they can become competitive. So that's by the World Economic Forum. So this is just to give you a background that where we are right now in the world. So this is by the Citibank. This is the ranking of cities in terms of their, ranking in competitiveness. And we can see that some of the cities have been doing better, and some other cities in the developing world, Delhi has also been jumping, Kuala Lumpur, Dubai, and Johannesburg, Istanbul is at 70th, position in terms of competitiveness. So there are many rankings. You can't say that which one is the final one, but I just want to give you, maybe you will find in some ranking Istanbul at the 20th number. There are some indicators where they talk about that Istanbul is one of the top 25 cities that is going to have an impact in the world in coming days. But that's different criteria, the way they determine. So these are some of the variables they try to capture. So what is actually the economist says economic strength measures how fast a city grows, how rich or poor its citizens are, and how well a city is integrated into the global economy. So that is their, sort of criteria to measure the economic strength of those cities as well. So as a student of public policy, as a student of social sciences, what we need to know that there is diversity in definition. This is not like natural sciences. This is not like physics or chemistry where you have one definition. So in social sciences, everyone sees things with a different lens. What we say, it's a perceived reality that we try to understand, and the truth is different to everyone. So that's how we define things differently, and that's what we need to, understand that, how can we, move ahead. So just to give you a flavor, that what's happening in the world, that this is China actually. So there are 3 regions of China. Most of the growth happened in these 3 regions. One is Hong Kong and Shenzhen region. The other one is this Beijing region and Shanghai. So what actually they did, they realized that is the key to growth. So they connected some of these cities like Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and similarly Beijing area, Shanghai, agglomeration. And now they've come up with a plan. Actually, they want to establish 19 such regions in China. They'll connect these cities. This shows the connectivity. And what they will say that these cities will cover 90% of the GDP of China, these 19 regions actually. So that is how the world is focusing now on cities and urbanization. As students of public policy, as citizens living on this planet in this century. So I think we need to be more aware what's happening, how can we improve our cities. And there is a career for all of you in urban management, in urban policy, in urban governance, because cities need more and more capable and professional human resource to deliver services in coming days as well. So this is something that where would you want to live? So that is a ranking that where you see that top 10 cities, Australia, Canada, and your DC city couldn't be, in those 10 cities. So anyhow, that is somewhere where you want to, people don't want to live, and those are the top 10 least, livable cities in terms of some ranking. So I earlier shared with you that there is a diversity with you, and I also looked into competitive cities, and I came up with my definition that I've been, sharing with academics and scholars, the way I see competitive cities. And this is the definition that a city that provides inclusive opportunities for social and economic mobility of individuals, businesses, and communities in an environmentally responsible way. So what I think cities' main purpose is mobility, that social and economic mobility, political mobility. And that's not only economic strength, all revolutions in the world, all political movements in the world, all social movements in the history of humanity, they emerged in cities actually. All religions actually, they started from cities. So why did it happen actually? The reason is it's so easy to move ideas and goods in cities as compared to far-flung areas. So it's easier to communicate, it's easier to, I'll talk more about that density thing, but that is actually something that we need to consider, that if a city is providing that mobility, if someone was, if the one generation couldn't get education, is the next generation able to get education, or they are also not getting it? But if you are in rural areas, a farmer's son or daughter will only have an opportunity to work on farm. So that's not the case in cities actually. They provide mobility. So that's political social mobility project, that if a city is delivering that thing, some people do research whether the new generations are doing better than the previous generations. So if cities are providing that opportunity, they are competitive, If they are not providing those opportunities, and if they are not compromising on environmental and sustainability of a city, we'll talk more about sustainability as well, but that's also an important question. And environment, and how can we make, just give you a crux. So again, how to achieve that, this project of mobility. So the very first thing what I consider that is important for cities is to promote entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is the most strongest tool to give economic mobility. The moment a person, he has not got education, he has not been to school, he becomes an entrepreneur, and the next moment, if he does well, he can go to the, he can make wonders actually, and that's the mobility. So the very first thing that entrepreneurship provides is actually the business dynamism in a city, and it provides you opportunity. And similarly, there are some other, service delivery aspects. What about, education? What about transportation? What about water and sanitation? What about housing? What about rule of law? So these are some of the important service delivery functions if we have to make our cities competitive. So then this entrepreneurship and service delivery, it should be at the, sometimes people talk about smart cities. We'll talk again about smart cities, but it's not just about, digitalizing everything just to look cool, that the city has these apps and everything. So this is the ultimate aim, is to deliver better services. If that technology, if that digitalization is delivering better services, then it means that you are a smart city, So I talked about environment. So these are two statements by two city leaders. One is by, Michael Bloomberg, that climate problems and solutions are in the cities. Cities are places. Some people present cities as challenge, some present as an opportunity. So they are actually both. So some people say that climate change is exacerbating, we need to take care of sustainability. But I was in that conference where Michael Bloomberg spoke these words, and he said, the cities will provide the solutions as well. These are the places, these are the laboratories, these are the universities. They'll think about these problems and they'll bring solutions as well. So don't consider cities just, problems. Consider cities as part of the solution. And then this is the, by Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, that climate change is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, risks to London actually. So that is the state of affairs in terms of climate change and environmental management throughout the world. And some of the key areas are buildings. How can we make our buildings more climate friendly? How can we save energy? How can we make their design better? How can we have come up with some innovations in our buildings? So that is a challenge that many subjects, many disciplines are working on. And similarly, the transportation, electric cars, smart cars, driverless cars, commuting, ride sharing. So all of this is happening right now in many cities in the world. And transportation is one of the key things that we need to take care to improve, climate change. And the next thing is solid waste and water. And that is again another challenge to cities. So these, I just listed a few areas in the climate change and environmental management, which have a great importance in terms of climate change as well. So the centrality of cities actually, that is in so many international, if you go on the Paris Accord, if you go on UN resolutions, if you go on many climate change, aspects, you'll find cities in every climate change of international accord. And that is the centrality of climate change, cities in the climate change agenda that cities need to, come up with. And so that was an overview of importance. Now we are coming to the importance of urbanization and cities. And there is a great literature that talks about importance of urbanization and cities. And this is a statement that I like a lot, that there are few paths to global development and growth that do not run through cities. Our city's population, city's size, that's what it is important, that if you are increasing it, then it means city is offering those opportunities. And similarly, there is an interesting book. I'll show some of the books at the end of my lecture. as if you are interested. So those are great resources. This is another book that he has documented role of cities since the ancient history. Actually, all cities have been playing a role, and particularly in the Industrial Revolution, it actually is the cities which played an important role that brought Industrial Revolution in Europe and many parts of the world. And cities facilitate mobility of goods, people, and ideas. And then role of cities in terms of agglomeration. We hear a lot agglomeration. So let me share with you, particularly for students, that agglomerations are actually three things that cities, are important for. So very first one is sharing. That in cities, when we live together, we share infrastructure, we share resources, we share restaurants. There is one restaurant, there is one chef, but many people are sharing that chef actually. So similarly, there is one transportation, we are sharing it. So cities are for sharing actually. The second agglomeration aspect is learning. So learning is so important that economists say that if you pick up a person living in a developing country and if he is working there, you pick up that person and you bring him in a developed country or her, and the very next day his or her productivity will improve. And why? That is actually the learning phenomenon, that you improve when you have more capable people around yourself. So that's what the productivity is. That's what we learn from each other. We sit together, we have universities, we have classrooms, we have cafes, we have lunches and everything. So that is matching. And the third thing is matching. Cities provide that opportunity, not only matching of entrepreneurs and laborers, they also provide matching for our friendships. They provide, there are many economists in America who work on dating. They say that cities provide that opportunity. They are dating platforms actually. So they help you find your life partners actually. So that's the job of cities as well. So that is something, matching, learning, sharing. So that's agglomeration. There are many people who have worked a lot. I've shared, some of their works here. So similarly, Cities and Wealth of Nation is a great scholar. She was, we are closer to this Women's Day as well. Jane Jacobs, who inspired urban studies throughout the world. She was a New Yorker. She even didn't have a college degree, but she inspired whole urban studies department. She fought against, big highways projects and these when Robert Moses was mayor of New York in early 60s, and then Bob Dylan sang for Jane Jacobs, and she fought against, they were trying to take a road through the Washington Square Park, and she stood against it, and she wrote a lot on cities, and her books are very famous now, so you should follow some of her works. So 21st century is the rural-urban migration we already talked about. 600 largest cities contribute more than half of the world GDP. What makes cities successful must be one of the most important questions of 21st century. So that was the question of our, today's discussion as well. So that is importance that the Competitiveness World Economic Forum is saying that this is one of the most important questions, And then cities have new challenges as well. Demography, the developed world, US, Europe, Japan, they are facing, aging population, and then developing countries facing, young population challenge. So they have their own set of challenges and opportunities. So these are something that cities need to work. And so this is a great paper. This is one paper that I've read a number of times. This is 2012. Edward Glaser, he's Harvard economist, and he's coming, I think, next week in World Bank. He's have a session on 21st. If you can see, you can, I think, RSVP. You can attend that session as well at the World Bank. So Edward Glaser, said there are 5 areas which are very important for urban research. One is optimal degree of federation, that how much powers and resources to be dealt by the federal government, by the state government, by the cities. So that's an important research question that cities need to figure out. And then whether they need to provide services through public partnership, through sole, public sector, or the engagement of the private sector, optimal land use regulations, spatial policies, and use of engineering and economic approaches. What is engineering approach? If you have congestion in your city, then engineering approach is widen your roads. That is the solution that engineers always come up with, and that was the history. But in Singapore in 1975, Singapore was the first country to introduce congestion charges in the downtown Singapore. and that was an economic approach. And then the London was the second city. London was the second city to introduce congestion charges. And since then, we see they had meter parking and everything. This is actually an economic approach to counter congestion in our cities. So there are other approaches as well. So this is a path that I wanted to show to you that, this is something that, the path that many countries in the world have followed. If you see that path, all development countries, there is a strong correlation between level of urbanization and the GDP per capita. So there is when a country grows in urbanization, its GDP per capita improves. There is a lot of discussion whether urbanization helps to improve GDP per capita or GDP per capita improves urbanization. So on the both sides, but we can't say there is a causality, but we are sure that there is a strong correlation indeed actually. So the same holds with the developing countries as well. This is Asia. There is a strong relationship between urbanization and GDP per capita. So some here I'll do some international comparison of cities that this is something income per household cities income. So I've just picked up a few cities and you can see that San Francisco is at the top, New York, Dubai, Copenhagen, and household expenditures on recreation and hotels. So why is it important? Because is city providing that sort of opportunity that people are spending, on these? There is a mobility. So that shows that there are some cities, Seoul is doing better. So that is, something that some cities do better in one thing, others do in another thing. And similarly, this is recreation and culture. And where, some cities, some people spend more money on recreation and culture because cities provide that opportunity and some cities don't provide it. So that's also important. This is an interesting, share of services as percentage of global value addition, that cities are actually for services sector. Over the time, cities focus more on services sector, and that's where the cities have their own competitiveness. So this one is interesting. This is employment in finance and business services as percentage of total employment. So what economists call actually thick markets. Thick markets are where there are many buyers, where there are many sellers. So when you have many business services, that's where businessmen try to go actually. So why the ratio is higher in San Francisco? Any idea from any student, public policy? Why is that ratio so higher in San Francisco? That is the ratio of employment in business services as percentage of total employment. So that is highest in San Francisco. Why is it that? Any idea? So then I'll have to turn to your teacher. So you should jump in there. So don't let me do that. So the reason is there is Silicon Valley. That is the thick market. So where entrepreneurs, there are many entrepreneurs, there are many services as well. When there are many services, there are many entrepreneurs. So they both reinforce each other. So that is the reason that San Francisco is the highest in the world. And whenever entrepreneurs go there, they only go there, they can find a good lawyer, they can find a good designer, they can find a good, just advisor, a marketing consultant, a guy who can outsource, and everyone is available at the single place. So that is, strength of San Francisco. That's how Silicon Valley has evolved over the time, and other countries also need to do a lot in terms of, creating such environment that there are more and more business services actually. So there are some global case studies that I follow and I'd like to share with you. That this is actually Wilmington, Delaware. So why is it famous for? It is famous for two things.
Maybe the city people don't pay taxes.
That's in throughout state of Delaware. So any idea? It's famous for two reasons. The one reason is its crime rate is very high, one of the highest in the US, And the second reason is that, this is the reason. More than half of US publicly traded firms and 64% of Fortune 500 firms are Delaware incorporations. So they are incorporated in Wilmington City. And similarly, more than 1 million active legal entities incorporated in Delaware, a state with fewer than 900,000 residents. Facebook, Google, Microsoft, every big company is incorporated in Wilmington actually, and that is due to the legal, what they call it. There are tax exemptions as well, and there is business chancery actually concept where they have a dispute resolution system. So what I want to emphasize here that cities need to figure out that if they really want to attract businesses, what do they need to do actually? So that's one thing. The second thing is important for research actually is a paradox. We say where there is crime, there is no business. And we say when there will be business, there will be more jobs and there will be lesser crimes. So this is a paradox that happens every day in Wilmington, Delaware. More and more companies registered and still crime rate is quite higher. Still poverty rate is quite higher. And that is an interesting paradox in some ways. So this is the city I like a lot. Actually, this is Medellin, Colombia. Why is it famous for? Young people who watch Netflix.
Yeah,
Pablo Escobar, So Medellin, Colombia is famous for, it was the city that produced Pablo Escobar. So they say that, this is such a, a crime-intensive city that Pablo Escobar could only born in that city actually. So that was such a city, that was such a danger and war, sort of environment in that city going on, drug wars and all these sort of things. So what happened that this city was most dangerous city in 90s. So it was declared as one of the most dangerous city in 90s. But then what happened in 2013, it was considered as the most innovative city. And obviously Pablo Escobar was no more in Medellin, Colombia at that time. So that's one reason. But more than that reason, actually, what I want to emphasize here, that it is impossible to transform countries in that short period of time. Cities give you that opportunity that you can transform cities in a short possible time. You can experiment new things, you can do new things, and you can make your cities better. So policy making is much more easier in cities, though it is complex. There is a great book I'll mention later on, that's Metropolitan Revolution. And that's on the US actually. And the writers say that you see a lot of partisan politics at national level and everything, but when you come at a city level, then because the politicians are more closer to people. So at city level, they usually work together, but at national level, they do partisan politics. So cities provide you that opportunity where you can come together and you can, just make good out of your cities. So many things happened. There was a great leadership in Medellin, Colombia. They did a lot of work on education, architecture, parks, libraries, transportation, innovation, inclusion. I have a documentary, that's a 5-minute documentary on Medellin, Colombia at the end of the presentation. If we'll find some time, then we can go to that, documentary as well. So this is my friend Rosa's city. Rosa is here from South Korea. She's doing PhD at George Washington University. And this is Seoul. So Seoul is famous for many things in the world, but this thing is Cheonggyecheon River. So Cheonggyecheon River stream that was buried under so many underpasses and bridges and everything. So in early 2000, there was a mayor who came into power and he asked, there used to be a stream here. So people were so much, accustomed to that stream and it was part of our culture. So where is that stream actually? So they told him there was a road on that stream, and then there was a bridge, and then there was a flyover, and then there was a building on that. So it has gone down somewhere far, just down and we can't figure it out. Where is that stream now? So, but he said, no, I want that stream back actually. So that stream was part of our culture. It was part of our society, and that stream is so important for the city. So he fought, a lot of struggle. He did that struggle. He mobilized people. It's a controversial project. He put a lot of money, but he brought that stream back actually. And now this stream is a very happening place in Seoul. It runs through the downtown Seoul, and it's a lively place. A lot of people visit that place. So that is an urban renewal project actually that has happened in Seoul, and it has become one of the lessons for the world, that you need to go for bigger structures, but you should not forget your, associations with your culture, with your society, the kind of, association they had with that stream, So here is Turkey, we are in BAU. So Turkey is, there is a recent phenomenon that we call the rise of Anatolian tigers. And so there were, exports were 3 billion in 1980. Turkey's exports were $3 billion. And in 2017, it was $157 billion. So around 40% is only from Istanbul, Turkey's exports. So that is the power of these cities. Other cities as well, secondary cities, now they have emerged other than Istanbul. At one point of time, it was about 60%. Now some of the jobs have outsourced to smaller secondary cities. So, but what happened actually in Turkey, there was a lot of rural-urban migration. I'll show you the graph that has happened over the time. But during that process, it provided labor force to industries, to factories, to manufacturing. They left, low productivity jobs and they moved to high productivity jobs. And that was the transformation that happened in Turkey in a very short period of time. And that urbanization process has helped Turkey, and this Anatolian tigers phenomenon has got, a lot of fame. So this is Turkey's urbanization. So it is going to catch Germany. It has caught Germany already. So this is 75% urbanized now, Turkey. So that you can see the pace and the progress that Turkey has done. Though Turkey's urbanization is considered, the quality of urbanization is far better than other emerging countries. They have their own challenges, but what does it mean now that we are reaching at 75%? Because Turkey was getting cheap labor from rural areas and they were coming to cities. Once you've reached at 75% urbanization, that is already sort of maximum growth that was possible in Turkey. And now this is time that Turkey needs to focus more on their cities, and we'll come into it about later, So here is Istanbul. So they say that Istanbul blends tradition with modernity. So it has got fame, and that's how Istanbul has attracted a lot of tourism actually. So at one point of time, they obviously planned that, tourism is something they need to promote as a cultural capital of the Europe. And that is, Istanbul has emerged as a city where you can find tradition, culture, and you can find modernity as well. That was, sort of thing. And there was 5% total population of Turkey in 1950 living in Istanbul, and as of now, it is about 20%. So that is the progress that Istanbul has made in the last, this 50, 60 years. And what does it show? When a city attracts population, it shows opportunities, because there are opportunities. People want to live there. People want to, live closer to that city. So that's what it is attractive, because they didn't push like China, the way Chinese urbanization is. The state plans everything, and then, that's a directed urbanization sort of thing. But here it was opportunity that was, sort of magnet for talent, for people to move around. So part of, that thing. So here is a challenge for Turkey in cities that is going to be faced. I told you, every country, every city has a different challenge. So in Turkey, the challenge is the highest region, Istanbul, has a far higher. There are disparities and inequality issues. Smaller towns actually they are not catching up. They are actually moving ahead, but still there is a challenge that Turkey needs to figure out, that how can they provide better opportunity to smaller cities as well. So these are some of the areas where we think that Turkey's comparison with other OECD countries. So I'll not go into detail. I'll leave that presentation here. But I thought when we are talking about Turkey, then maybe they have reached at a mature level of urbanization. Now what is time? This is time to focus more on data, technology, data centers, Internet of Things. So Turkey has already started some projects in this regard. World Bank is also working with them. Istanbul has a data center now, and now they have a pilot project as well. But this is something where moving forward is agenda for Turkey, I think. And improve productivity of urban labor force, because no more you are going to get rural-urban migration. So you need to focus on your existing labor force. And because manufacturing or industry that will just go to lesser developing countries over the time or smaller cities. No, big cities need to focus more on startups and services sector. And then there are issues of coordination among different agencies and urban policy research that is still lacking in Turkey. So this is an area where I think there is a lot of room that is available in this regard. So there are many other global case studies that I follow. I'll just briefly go through it before moving on next. So there is the cities and industrial scientific revolution. There is a lot of research on figuring out the contribution of cities in industrial revolution. So I think that's an interesting phenomenon, that which cities played what sort of role in industrial revolution. So that's a history that is important to us, and we can learn lessons from it. So in 1950s, there were these two cities of the US, New York and Pittsburgh. They were industrial giants of that time. Nobody could figure out that whether there will be decline of jobs in Pittsburgh or Rust Belt cities or these things. Nobody predicted. But there was one economist. His name is Benjamin Chinitz. He was president of American Economic Association. He gave a presidential address in that time, and he said that New York will continue to rise and Pittsburgh will lose its jobs, and Pittsburgh will lose its dynamism soon. And nobody believed at that time. But how did he came about it? He talked a lot about SME sector in New York and big industries in Pittsburgh. He said those big industries are not associated with the city actually, as compared to New York, where there are smaller companies and they have a strong bond with the city. And they are connected with each other, but these big companies are self-sufficient. They don't care about other resources. So that's how over the time there will be competitiveness in New York, and that's what happened later on. That's a very famous paper that every urban scholar starts discussing urbanization with, David Chinitz's paper. So Shenzhen is an interesting case study. So this is called a startup city. China started a new city and experimented new things, new policies in Shenzhen. And what they thought that, because at that time in 1980s, they have strict controls, and they thought that they need to experiment policy reforms in cities, one city as compared to introducing every part of the country. So that concept has given rise throughout the world. Now there are many new cities. The phenomenon is called new economic cities. Many countries in the world, King Abdullah economic city, one Gwadar city in Pakistan with China, and many other new cities are coming up. Songdo is a new Korean city that they call this is the city of the future. And it is one of the most, environmentally friendly country as well. And so that is an interesting, Google city in Canada. They are building a new city near Toronto that Google is helping Canada. So that's a phenomenon is called startup cities, new economic cities. And Seattle is an interesting case study even in the US. Seattle was very sort of poorly performing city in the US. And it was not doing better. And the only one thing that changed the destiny of Seattle, that was shifting of Microsoft headquarters to Seattle. And that Bill Gates shifted, not because of any reason that city is very good, just because he had association with that city. And the moment he shifted Microsoft there, and then that became the hub of all technology-related things. And so that is the reason when I said about entrepreneurship, if you produce great entrepreneurs, they give back a lot to your city. So if you suppress them, then you are losing a lot of disadvantages. And when Bill Gates decided, he went there. And after that, Amazon, what Jeff Bezos was starting Amazon, he figured out where is the best place to go. And he thought Seattle is the best place because he'll find trained Microsoft employees and web developers, everyone in Seattle. And once Amazon and they were there, then that was the starting of a new revolution in entrepreneurial revolution in Seattle. So people have documented there are 5,000 IT companies, great IT companies, which actually came out of Microsoft, because those were the people who worked at some point of time at the Microsoft. They were Microsoft alumni, and most of them first their starting point was Seattle, and later on they shifted to other cities. Some of them went on. So that's how Seattle actually, that been associated with Bill Gates. Dubai International Financial Center is an interesting case study. DIFC, they have a statute, they have their own legal system, and they have established a regional financial hub, and they have common law system in Dubai as compared to other parts of the. So that's another new for cities. Seoul, I visited Seoul municipal government, and if any municipal government has amazed me, this is actually Seoul Municipal Corporation. If you go there, you will find a institute, Seoul Institute. That's a think tank, and that think tank actually provides policy advice to Seoul. And they have recently financed a Seoul University. And in that Seoul Institute, there may be like 50 PhDs working on urban transportation and so many things. And that's how Seoul has become, that sort of hub for Korea, that they did that lot of research. That capacity is amazing in Seoul Municipal Corporation. Sialkot is a Pakistani city. It's a small city. It's an export-oriented city that manufactures this soccer, what you call in America. Otherwise, people call it football. So that soccer is manufactured, that is played in this World Cup and everywhere. So that is the city that manufactures it. The businessmen of that city, they have a great tradition of working with the government together and building infrastructure. That is the first city in Asia to build, first businessmen run airport in that city. Actually, that's an international airport. They've done it. They work together, so they have a great capacity in terms of city's contribution businesses. That's an interesting initiative. Bloomberg, when Mike Bloomberg was the mayor of New York, so he thought that we need to come up with new ideas. And there were already Columbia University, there was NYU, and all great universities in New York. But he said, no, we want to go even higher. And what he did actually international bidding to attract universities. And in the first bid, it was Cornell, and in the second bid, it was Technion from Israel and some other universities. He provided them space, and many people, raised objections because why do New York need new universities? We have already Columbia, but he said they can also compete. But if the city really wants to do the cutting edge research, we need to go into competition. Who can deliver us better? Who can help us to improve in biotechnology and engineering? And now Cornell has established, I think that's the Roosevelt Island, where Cornell has established that campus. And that was city's initiative, and to attract international universities. And that's what cities need to do in the future as well. So that is the last crux of what I understand. We've discussed many challenges, we've discussed many opportunities that city gives, and now we are back to the again question that what makes cities more competitive. So there are many reasons, but the very first thing that I consider from my research, from experiences, from coming from the literature review, case studies, and research, I think the fundamental thing is capable, professional, local governance. Actually, that is at the heart of making cities competitive. The federal governments sitting in federal capitals, they can't make good decisions about cities. If you really want to improve, cities' competitiveness, then the decisions should be made in cities. And then cities need to not only make decisions, they need to build their own capacity. They need to have in-house research centers, work with universities, students, and then get new advice. That is actually crux of capable and professional governance. The second thing is private sector facilitation, that we talked about the World Bank report as well, that cities are competitive if they are really into promoting private sector. So that is something that the cities need to do. There are a number of things, I can show it later. And then innovations in urban design. That is so important, urban design. It improves productivity. It helps you, just to make cities more livable, that what sort of innovations we can do in terms of our cities, in terms of urban design, that can make cities competitive. And the third thing is the service delivery or quality of life. What about education? What about transportation? What about water and sanitation? There are some cities who have done, much better in terms of water, like New York's water is considered one of the best in the world. And similarly, that is not the case in many other cities. And the last thing that I want to share with you, it's a new concept that urban scholars are working on. This is called civic capacity. So civic capacity is the ability of a city to come together, and where different stakeholders come together and they make, wonderful things. I shared with you the example of Sialkot. I shared with you the way Michael Bloomberg, worked with other stakeholders, and Seoul, worked with think tanks. And that is something that I think that can make, do we have 5 minutes? I can. Okay. So I'll come to one each of things, these capable and professional governance. When I say the very first thing is cities revenue generation capability. Our cities, how much efforts are they doing, and what are their own source revenues, and how much are they relying on the federal government, on provincial government, on state governments as well. So that is key actually. If city wants to have an autonomy, they need to find ways in revenue generation as well. And the second thing is in-house thinking capability, and obviously outside advice as well. That cities need to have in-house thinking capability, data technology and informed decision making, and even for that, cities need to have capable public servants who can work, who can make sense of data, who can devise cybersecurity policies, who can devise smart city policies, who can understand, IoT policies, and they need that sort of capable human, resource to understand it and to make good out of it. And then role of mayors and city management is so important. Then over the time, I think there are many organizations who are providing leadership course, and maybe BAU should also do at some point of time, training programs for mayors and, city councilors and, all these people in the US. And Harvard has started a mini MBA sort of for city leadership as well. And there is a great need actually for city leaders to be trained, to understand the challenges, to deliver services to people actually. And then horizontal and vertical coordination and collaborations, that how can they improve coordination with federal government, with state government, and how can they connect with other cities as well. So that's horizontal. And similarly, the vertical coordination, there is no formal rule like in the US. Cities are a lot autonomous as compared to the UK, where London mayor has only a mandate to work on the transportation. The London mayor doesn't have a mandate to work on education, to health, and even law and order. So that is dealt by the federal government. So, but here in the US, city has a great leverage actually. And the education is localized. They have some mandate in health interventions and many other things that cities can do. So the same thing around the world, there are different symmetries that cities have figured out over the time. So when we come to the private sector facilitation, your regulatory environment is so important. Zoning and contract enforcement is very important. Even in the US, but we see over the time, the productivity growth has stagnated. And the last report that President Obama did before leaving the office, so that report on the state of economy of the US, they found out that over the time, the United States has gone too much into regulations. So those regulations have been, putting a constraint on productivity growth. So that is an area for every city where some cities put restrictions on vertical growth as well, that also discourage, affordability of housing. And city-based economic development offices, we need to strengthen such offices, and we need to do policy experimentation by the cities as well. Research and innovation, and I earlier talked about thick market of entrepreneurs. So this is an important statement, like we talked about Istanbul as well, that over the time they'll be losing manufacturing jobs. There are Rust Belt cities, what we call in the US, they have been losing jobs. And so when cities try to do actually, they try to protect those industries. So that they should not do actually. So let them die out, you'll find out new industries coming out of it. So that's what this statement says, that prop up or subsidized growth of declining or stagnant local industries spell future unemployment. And rather, cities need to be nimble, ready to change public service and infrastructure provision to match the needs of new producers, especially in countries with export-led growth. So there was a time when there were horse carts on the city roads, and there were not roads, these paved roads actually. When these cars came, then cities had to build infrastructure for cars. And similarly, there is a growth of these electric cars, driverless cars, new opportunities, IoTs. These things are coming up, and cities need to provide response to these opportunities. How can they get maximum out of it? So innovation in urban design, public spaces, embracing technology and public-private partnerships, density, walkability, mixed use, and climate change responsiveness. These are some of the areas in urban design which are at the forefront nowadays, that whenever cities are designing their policies and urban design, they do take care of these things if they really want to become competitive. So due to scarce time, we are not going into detail of everything, but these are the things that they demand a lot of research actually, what sort of urban design is needed. And quality of life, mobility through transit systems and intercity connectivity, housing, relaxed limits on the vertical growth, water and sanitation, wastage disposal, education, public libraries, law and justice and inclusion. These are some of the areas where a lot of research is happening, where we need more understanding, where we need diverse perspective, where students need to come forward and provide input. Maybe universities, they also need to collaborate with city governments, and they need to work closely with them and provide them input, analyze it, and tell them what are the best ways to do these things. And the last thing is the civic capacity that I told you about, ability to forge coalitions and develop, implement shared agenda to attract collection response to address collective problems. So there are many examples in the world. I earlier shared with you a Pakistan city Sialkot's example. That is actually the civic capacity that that city has demonstrated together actually. And similarly, there is a recent research, what we call multi-level governance. And that some scholars did a long project in the US, and they tried to identify what are the reasons of variations in educational outcomes in different cities in the United States. And they found out where there is a higher civic capacity, where people are more informed, where people are engaged, they are working together with school districts, their educational outcomes are far better than other areas. So that's what they found out in the US, where education is devolved at the local district level, and that they found out that where they have lesser civic capacity, educational outcomes was not very good actually. And then there is a research how to forge that civic capacity, how to work together. And then I talked to you about Metropolitan Revolution, this book that talks about how cities can come together. And scholarship on data and cities. So here I'll quickly show you a few books that if you want to write down, the presentation will be here. That's a great book. I like this book. It's A Triumph of a City. That's by Edward Glaser. This is a Harvard economist, and he's more into cities. So that books you give a very good flavor of urban policy challenges and what city managers or students need to do in many ways, And this is Jane Jacobs' book. I told you earlier about Jane Jacobs. It was written in 1960s, but it is still valid, and it will remain valid maybe for another century. So the death and life of great American cities. So it talks about American cities' history, the way they got success, and the way they've been facing some of the challenges. And similarly, another book by Jane Jacobs is The Economy of Cities. And that's also a great book to understand that actually what she talks about, when we say about economy of country, there is no economy of country. There is actually addition of city economies actually. So you need to go at a city level actually to figure out if a country wants to do better, you need to figure out each city's strength. So once you figure out each city's strength, then you can combine it to become an economic strength of a country actually. So this is the book that's more on the US, and it's on the Metropolitan Revolution. And they both work at Brookings Institute, and that's in DC. Bruce Katz is a scholar on urban policy. And how cities and metros are fixing our broken politics and fragile economy. This is very relevant in today's United States of America, I think. So this is another book that tells you a very good history of cities and economic development, the way cities have been playing an important role throughout the history of humanity, and that is something that I like reading this book. It's a thick one, but it's a very good read. So this is a recent book by Enrico Moretti. He's California, I think, Stanford professor. And The New Geography of Jobs. It talks more about the US cities, the way jobs have been shifting from one city to another, and what has been happening in the job market in the US over the time. And that is also a great resource, I think. So these are some other series books as well. I've mentioned it here, so you can go through some of them. And thank you.
Thank you very much. much, David. You touched upon many topics. And my students are here not only from public policy, but also competition course and environment course. So you will have much more topic questions. So we'll be ready. If they cannot formulate the questions, I will assist them. So be ready to settle it.
So I'll forward the question to you.
So please, we are welcoming all questions. And feel free to ask him about Pablo Escobar, dating sites, urbanization, politics, anything that comes to your mind. And I would encourage, just my bias for South Asia, my South Asian students to ask the first question. South Asian cities, how competitive are they? Yes? No? Come on. They are shy. Okay, you ask the first question. Sound please.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very great. My question is, based on your presentation, you did not include Washington, D.C. on the most, one of the innovating cities. And we all know is that D.C. is really innovating. It has great institutions like World Bank or IMF. They also have a lot of jobs opportunity in DC. So can you explain?
So I didn't mean that I've not actually assessed myself for these cities, and it wasn't an inclusive list of cities. And it doesn't mean if DC didn't come out in this list, it means DC is not competitive. DC has its own strength, and it has its own challenges. What you are saying, some of the things, because it's more into the capital cities throughout the world. They are more into politics, lobbying, jobs, and all these sort of things. And they really do not get into much of the innovation in terms of technology and these things. So, but DC has been attracting some IoT, some technology firms, and the main reason is the public procurement actually. So a lot of federal procurement, it happens in DC, and that is the reason that Amazon, that these have built their data centers here, and they've been doing it in DC. And lately, Virginia has been also attracting some tech firms and industries as well. So I don't have any comprehensive ranking at the moment where I can say, but the other, there are many websites where they have done many rankings, but DC does not come out prominently in one of the top competitive cities in many ways. So we like, I like walking in city, but I can't afford to live in DC. That's the reason. If you can't afford to live, then it means it's not competitive city. So then you make it more affordable actually. So DC has its own, they have tried to preserve its architecture, these 5-story, buildings, everything, but it has a great, effect on the affordability thing. So that is one reason that, like, I'm from Islamabad, Pakistan. I was telling a friend of mine earlier that some of my, relatives or friends from my village, they come to Islamabad. It's very expensive city in terms of real estate. So they tell to me that it's a beautiful city, and it is one of the beautiful capitals in the world. And they tell to me that, this is beautiful city. And then I ask them for home actually. So it's beautiful for home who can afford to live actually. For others, it's just they come and go. And in DC, most of people work here, but they don't stay here. So they stay in Virginia, they stay in Maryland. So if DC can provide that opportunity where people can live in DC, that will really make the difference. But then DC will have to figure out the ways to accommodate, those many people who are working in DC if they can afford to live in DC. So that is at the heart of problem in DC.
But based on your information, we notice that when a city grows, it becomes expensive. It's like South Korea or Seoul, it became expensive compared to Seoul 20 years.
So expensive thing is also relative. Expensive is related to opportunity as well. That things become expensive. Hong Kong is expensive, one of the most expensive cities in the world, but it gives you a lot of opportunities as well. Like I was talking about some of cities in India and Pakistan. They are real estate speculation due to many reasons. the real estate is very, very expensive. And buying a house is more expensive than buying in New York. So if that is the case, then imagine the opportunities in New York and in those cities. So expensive thing is also related to opportunities. That what is costing and then what are you getting out of it. So that is also important. So DC is very expensive, but it has only government jobs, it has think tanks, it doesn't have private sector many jobs. And there are lobbyist jobs, there are law firm jobs, obviously, but there are not many, these innovative companies who have their home in DC. That's what. But it is. The list wasn't, exhaustive in a way that every city was part. It was just pick and choose to show some of the cities.
Yeah. Just to carry out a little bit on what you were saying, when I was looking at the data analytics to the right and the left for those cities of New York, and I noticed Dubai and some of the others, you had numbers to the right, and then on the other side, you had larger numbers in 2025. So when I looked at Dubai, I saw a very low number, but then for 2025, I saw this huge number.
Yeah.
So do you, in retrospect to that, do you think the population is expanding, growing, developing that expansion from that data to the other data? Is that what
So that was the list was global hotspots in 2025. That city and economists, they did that ranking. Which will be the cities which will be hotspots in 2025? So from now onward, they think that these are the cities. They are not hotspot today, like Delhi or Bombay. Maybe, there will be like in that city, they thought that there will be 25 hotspot cities. Out of top 25, there will be 9 Chinese and 7 Indian cities according to that ranking. So they are going to be 16 would be just from China and India. So the reason is that they are expanding their population, they are attracting more population, and they are attracting young, skilled population as well. So what is happening in the developed world, they have started shrinking. They are facing the challenge of shrinking population. And in developing world, they have huge labor force coming. If they manage it well, the caveat is the quality of urbanization. If you give them good services, they'll become opportunity. What Edward Glaser said, that cities can become engines of growth, and they can also become centers of despair, crime, and poverty as well. So it depends, cities gives you both things. So it depends on your management, it depends on how thinking do you do, that what do you get out of it. So that's something they thought that the path that these cities are following, they are going to be hotspots in 2025.
So when you went over the competitive cities part, you listed a bunch
Can
of
you
options.
please speak a bit louder?
Sure. When you were introducing your services delivery under your competitive cities section, I didn't see accessible healthcare listed there. Why is that?
No, I think I mentioned about healthcare a few times. Maybe I may have missed it, but obviously health is very important. But usually what happens, health is generally a state level, subject, or cities do have intervention, particularly in preventive healthcare. And in the US, because cities have that autonomy, and what cities have lately been doing in the US, because healthcare industry in the US is the fastest growing industry in terms of employment in the United States, is the healthcare industry. And the reason is aging population. So when you are going to have more and more aging population, if I have not mentioned, that may be my mistake, but health is very important. Cities can do something. That's not only healthcare mean building new hospitals. Healthcare also means, taking care of health of your people, in terms of, how good you are in managing pollution in your city. How good are you, establishing elderly homes in your cities. So that is something these centers that cities are promoting. They are helping non-profits in the US, and they are incentivizing them to do more and more elderly care, these assistant run, but that's the terminology that they call it, I'm forgetting it. So these are the centers, they are the future, I think, particularly in aging population. So that's very important. In Korea, they are facing even a severe challenge of aging population, and they are going into IoT, more and more IoT. How can they facilitate elderly population? And city is working a lot on elderly. And similarly, so these are some of the aspects. How many healthcare facilities are in terms of gyms and recreational facilities in your city? Do you incentivize some people to establish these things in neighborhoods or in small these things? So these are some of the areas where cities do need to work on, I think. Even if hospitals or medicine or drugs, that's the subject of state or federal government. There is a lot that cities can do in terms of promoting healthcare. And walkability, give chance to people to walk, instead of just, asking them to wait in cars and, just stay there on roads for hours and hours. So if they walk for half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening, that's good for health,
Thank you for the presentation. My question, what are the negative effects of urbanization on developing countries?
Okay. So I told you that cities facilitate ideas, goods, and so similarly, cities facilitate movement of crimes, diseases, and poverty as well. So because when we are living together, it's easy to catch diseases as well. When we are living together, then it's easier that we are producing more pollution as well. So that is the reason that in developing countries, some of the countries, they have not been managing their urbanization well actually. So that is the reason that there are many negative consequences. Still, there are positive opportunities, but sometimes we focus more on negative. And even cities are unable to provide very good quality of life. Still, they are attracting population. What does it mean? It means that at least they are providing better services than those rural areas. So people are even living worse conditions in those rural areas. So in the development sector, sometimes we say that we need to stop people on urbanization. That's wrong policy actually. The right policy is to make our cities better. So if you stop people to moving to cities, then this is some people in developing countries, what they do actually, they fantasize rural areas. So they say they are great people, they are closer to nature and whatever. And then I always ask them, why don't you go and live there, So if you are so much into love of those rural areas. So they themselves, many of the city people, they want to live in these cities, but they don't want others to come into cities. That's the same thing as at the international level, what we see actually. When we are living in the US, some people moved in the US earlier, and now they say that, okay, no, we don't want to let others move here actually. So we have already come here. So that is the same thing as with cities, Sometimes these regulations that we develop on the vertical growth, they are in the favor of existing population. And they are actually against people who are moving new to those cities. So that's how we need to make it better. And the Edward Glaser writes in his books, as had someone stopped Andrew Carnegie's grandfather to move to cities, Andrew Carnegie would have been, taking care of cows in Scotland somewhere. Had someone blocked the, movement, rural-urban migration of Bill Gates' grandparents. So Bill Gates would have been doing some, taking care of sheep somewhere. So because they came to cities, so that's where those cities provided them opportunities to become Bill Gates, to become Andrew Carnegie. So these cities provide spaces. So when we see cities, we think that whosoever is moving for rural areas, they are going to snatch our opportunities. That's not the case actually. They also create opportunities, just like immigrants. If you see in the United States, so every, 1 out of 3, entrepreneurs in the Silicon Valley has actually an immigrant background, in the Silicon Valley. And the reason is when you are new to cities, you are new to a country, you are more challenged, and you are more into making efforts to, just to get mobility from your circumstances. So that's how there are challenges in developing countries, but the solution is not to stop urbanization. The solution is that we need to improve our cities. How can we make them hospitable? How can we make them, just more forthcoming to new population?
Mr. Khan, thank you for a brilliant presentation. I got 2 questions to separate. One is about the economy, and the other one has to do with the environmental things. So the first one is how does the inflation impact on the economy of big cities such as New York and London? And the other one is about environmental, like how would you describe the recycling system in a big city that they're overpopulated?
So can you repeat both? The first one is inflation. The second one is
Like recycling system.
recycling.
Yeah, recycling system on the cities that they're overpopulated.
Yeah. I think that's the first thing I've already just talked about, that when there are more opportunities, it attracts more people, and when there are more people, then you are going to get higher prices actually. So particularly the first effect is on property pricing. So sometimes it's artificial, sometimes it's speculation. You need to take care that it's not artificial, it's not speculation, and there is intrinsic value in that real estate actually. And that's how you control inflation in a way that New York has, these city laws that restrict increases in rents, that restricts. Those are good in some ways, but they produce negative consequences as well. So we should not do things with coercive, things or hard tools. We should do things with soft tools and incentives. And the second thing was more about recycling. And I've talked about, that's a great challenge to all cities actually, recycling system, and that is the future. We need to do solid waste, collection, recycling, wastewater recycling. So things are coming up in developing countries. Things are in very bad shape right now, and the governments do not have investments. And I think the right move is to go for public-private partnerships, where we can engage private investment. Cities won't be able to do all these things at their own. They need private investment, they need private expertise, and they need to come together. Sometimes people say, oh, giving everything to the private. That's not giving everything to the private sector. That's just creating an enabling environment for bringing private sector investment. And then you can develop safeguards, you can develop regulations, and you can develop these sort of policies where you can get maximum out of these private investments. And I think we do need private investment for many of these recycling. Government can give financial support, some of that, but they do need private investment.
Okay, so I just want to know, I know the urbanization now starts from the capital cities. So what's the goal now, to urbanize the rural areas or keep expanding the urbanization of the capital cities? What's the right way?
Okay. So when we say that, so the research says that we should not do directed urbanization. Directed urbanization is where you plan things that where to send people. So that's the wrong thing. You may decide something, and it will turn out that you made a wrong decision. So don't do it. That's what research suggests. Let people decide, and the aim should be to providing opportunities in every city, whatever a city can do best. How can cities compete with each other, and how can they, come out with some, significant differences and similarities as well. Some basic services each city should do. And when you talk about, some big cities where they are proliferating, then there is a concept. It's called secondary cities. Secondary cities are those which are not as important. Like for the US, if we are talking about Chicago, if we are talking about New York, DC, San Francisco, LA, and these are, sort of primary cities, Boston. But if you go, on the side, there would be Dover in Delaware. There will be, just other cities in other states, smaller cities. So those are called secondary cities. So yes, there is a need to make our secondary cities better, so that people can go to the nearby cities instead of traveling a long distance. If you can provide them nearby, that's better. But that should not be a sort of coercive policy to force people to go here and you don't go here. So having internal passports or internal controls is a bad move. That's not a good decision.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I would like you to explain more about the startup scene and how those different tests are they being funded from the national level, or are they just influence the private sector companies over like companies smart and then wonder their companies.
So the concept of startup city is a new economic city. Probably some of you are familiar with Paul Romer. Paul Romer is an economist who won Nobel Prize this year's economics Nobel Prize, and he has lately been working on the potential of new economic cities. So this is actually a great advantage, like you were mentioning. Instead of sending people to existing cities, create new cities as well. And the reason is because in existing cities, it is difficult to change rules and policies. If you are to shift one person, it would be difficult to shift one block from one place to another. But if you design a new city, like no, we are going to face the challenge of electric cars, driverless cars. So if you have to make your existing cities adaptable to these innovations, it would be a difficult task. But if you create a new city, you can create new infrastructure. So that gives the advantage to new cities. But the way we call it startup, there is a caveat and there is a pitfalls of that idea. Like a startup firm, the failure rate is very high. Like 60, 70, 80, 90% startups fail. And same has been happening with cities as well. When China started Shenzhen, they started 2 other cities and only Shenzhen succeeded actually. So there is 1 out of 3. And Songdo is a great city. It's very climate friendly. It's environment friendly. In Korea, that's near Incheon. Incheon was a success story, but Songdo is considered. Some say it's too early to say failure, but many have been saying it a failure story. That's a great city, big roads, walkability, climate friendly, everything. Everyone loves to visit there, but nobody wants to live there. So that it has failed to attract population. So similar stories with many other new cities in the world, and some has been success. Then there is a story that if we create new cities, what are the success factors, what are the failure factors? We need to understand those, and then we can come up with better strategies. And there are the governments which are doing, and some there are private sector collaborations, like in the Google city that Google is developing. That's a new city by Google actually. And there are governments also working on new economic city. If you go on the website, Saudi Arabia is building a new city. They call it King Abdullah Economic City. So you'll see a private real estate company, Imar, on that website. So probably that's part of a company that is helping them to build that city. And similarly, there are many other new economic cities which are, but we can't guarantee that whether it is going to be a success or what would be the failure. We don't know it yet. This is just a, sort of a bet that the best bet that you can do is plan it well.
Thank you very much. My name is Anthony, and I wanted to know, in the education sector, what do you think schools can do or should do to prepare the kids for those competitive?
I think that's lately it has been a topic of research a lot and practice as well. That there was a time when we used to train people, and that training was relevant throughout their life actually. And now this is the time with this automation, with this technology. They say whatever you learn, that's going to be redundant in next 2 to 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So then instead of forcing students to memorize things, the real thing is to improve their creative ability. So make them creative and teach them to learn and how to learn. So that is important, and lifelong learning process, that they develop their association with learning so that they can continue. That's one area where education system is going to change in future. And the second thing is that how can you, some of the civic responsibilities that in schools that they have been doing, some schools good, but others have not been doing it. So what about water conservation? What about, taking care of greenery, taking care of trees, that. So these are some of the things that, in the education system, we can embed these ideas. Enough for today, I think.
No.
Okay, no?
Of course, it's until 9 as well.
My name is Campbell from Mongolia. So I just want to note that our city is published for 1.5 billion.
Can you please speak a bit? Yeah, you can come close. Okay, so what's that?
I'm from Mongolia. So our city is Ulaanbaatar, which is just 1.5 million. It's the whole population of 50%.
Okay.
So most of them, they move from the port side to the city and to leave. So now in my country, the biggest challenge is the pollution, but also the recycle and disposal of
Okay.
water. I mean, so how can we compete in these less populations? How does it affect? I mean, we just need some more maybe workforces, maybe from outside to build those.
Yeah. So the right idea is to build the capacity of the city governments. That should be the key, I think. So if I have to say just one thing, that is building capacity of the city governments. So if you will build their capacity, so then they'll take care of all these challenges. There isn't any lack of money. If there would be lack of money, they'll find a way to bring private investment. If there would be, lack of resources, then they can engage resources from the private sector. They can engage universities, but they need to be aware of, what to do, how to do, and engaging. So I think if we have to do single thing, that is building the capability of your city government.
Thank you.
Last question.
I'm moderating. Onurcan,
I was thinking.
Ahmet. Buddy. Okay.
My hometown is Istanbul, urbanization and it's bringing to more populations. That's bringing big cause for city, like traffic, criminal, and education. And what is the best way for it? They try to make a couple urbanization city each other, or what is the best solution for that for cities?
No one knows the best solution in this world.
Or just what is the idea? Because this is hard.
We only experiment solutions. So no one knows what is the ultimate truth in the social world. So what we need to do, we can learn from the world actually. So the one way is again, I would say that if your city is proliferating and you need to manage it well, if you think there is congestion, then increase the density charges and make walkability, improve transit system so that people walk and they don't come on cars, discourage cars, and then go vertical. That is to absorb more and more power, but there would be limit then. And then what countries are doing, they have also been creating new cities closer to existing cities. Like in Seoul, I mentioned earlier, there is Incheon district. So Incheon is where there is no Seoul airport, there is a lot of special economic zone, industry. So they created this new setup and then they connected it through transit system. So the one way is to, if you think that, you are unable to absorb, maybe creating new cities, but connectivity would be very important then. You create new cities, but you don't connect it, with the transit system, then you lose the advantage. So that is, there are many ways to, sort of manage the negative consequences of rapidly proliferating cities.
There are emerging cities in Africa like Lagos and Johannesburg. Do you think that those cities can be part of the innovating cities?
They are. Johannesburg has been doing many great things, and only sub-Saharan Africa, where the research has been done that the strong relationship that we see in urbanization and development, that is weakest in sub-Saharan Africa as compared to anywhere in the world. And the reason is the difference is quality of urbanization. You have more people in cities in sub-Saharan Africa as compared to other African regions, but in there is urbanization quality is lower. And if Johannesburg is relatively one of the leading African cities, obviously in many ways. So it's ethnically diverse as well, and it's attracting tourism in many ways. And obviously these cities have, that's what I was saying, urbanization project in developed world has stopped actually. No, this is the turn of developing world. This is Africa, this is Asia, who are going to make progress in terms of building new cities and enlarging cities, and that's an opportunity. We should not consider it as a challenge or a threat actually. Sometimes in development world, we consider it as a threat. Oh, there is so much urbanization. What would we do? So that should be the good thing. There is so much urbanization is a good thing, not bad thing.
So now we are changing gears. One of our professors, Badr, has a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Navid, for a great presentation. Just to follow up on Asia and Africa and how we could develop competitive cities. Do you think agriculture still has a role to play? Because if you look at cities in the developed countries, you see that as the cities evolved, historically, agriculture has actually contributed. But in African, sub-Saharan African countries, developing countries in Asia, you still find that there is high level of food insecurity, nutrition insecurity. So what's your take on the agriculture and the establishment or creation of competitive cities?
Okay, so this was sort of an established thing that cities came out of agricultural surplus actually. When there was surplus, then people would move to cities so that they can utilize that surplus, and that is the established hypothesis. Many disciplines have that established hypothesis. But Jane Jacobs even has contradicted this hypothesis. She said she gave out a lot of reasons, a lot of history, and came out is actually cities that have helped agriculture sector. So in a number of ways. So she came up, and then there was this discussion on industrial revolution. That where did all, the green revolution, where did all these technologies come from? So all these technologies were invented in cities about agriculture, about these implements, and then they went to the rural areas. So there is what I say, that's a debate that academics can do as long as they want to do that, who help whom actually. But for practitioners, there is a strong relationship. And obviously rural areas and cities become markets for rural commodities, and cities provide education, they provide ideas. And similarly for industrial revolution, what this book has documented that many of the technologies were invented in rural areas because at that time there was no electricity and they had to be closer to the water ways, and similarly they had to be closer to coal mines as well. So the technologies were invented in rural areas, but what cities did actually, cities helped to diffuse those technologies. So that is the relationship. In somewhere technologies were emerged and went to city. So if today we have talked about agriculture, mechanization, better pesticides, better fertilizer, where would these ideas come from? They'll come from this research university, somewhere from Rosa's University, that's George Washington University, from biotechnology department, from some other department. So they'll work on these, technologies and progress and ideas and patents, and then they'll take it to agriculture, So, but I say that similarly, agriculture areas provide labor force over the time. When mechanization happens, people can't find jobs there, then they have to come to cities. So there is a strong correlation between rural areas, and I think they reinforce each other, if I summarize it. So they reinforce each other. But that debate, people have been having it for so long, that what is more important. So I think I personally don't go into that debate.
I guess we have, please. Now you.
He was my friend. I asked my friend, don't ask me questions.
He sweat enough, but please.
Just carrying forward what my colleague here said, we're talking about the urbanization, and 20% of population are currently in Eastern Zone, and 75% of the FDM are urban. So what is the optimum level of urbanization? Where is the balance between rural and urban?
So threshold maximum is countries can go max 80 to 90 somewhere. That's what the countries have followed, other than the city states like Singapore, Hong Kong, which are city states. So other than that, so maximum somewhere it starts from 80 and it remains somewhere around 80. So 90 is the max, I think. Some countries are not have data right now, but there is some data according to urbanization. So that is the maximum that a country can achieve. Still, there will be some people living in urban. So as far as balance is considered, again, I would go to that policy when we try to direct that balance. So that is something states should not do and cannot do. So that depends on lot of many factors which are out of control of state. So that right balance, there isn't any such thing as a balance thing that how much it should be. But some people say that, whatever population lives in rural areas, then you have to provide services to them as well. So how would you do that? That would become a challenge, because if there will be fewer people, then cost of service delivery will be much higher. So if there is very thin majority living in thin population living in rural areas, then giving them hospital, giving them all these sort of services, it becomes very expensive. And so then it becomes a challenge as well. The negative consequences of lesser density. So I've not come across any, maybe I'm not familiar with that research, but that's a good question, that what scholars recommend. So, but one thing that I've read through is scholars recommend that don't impose these things on people and population. Let it be decided, what we call in economics Schumpeterian, process, or animal spirit. So let people decide who wants to start a business, who wants to join the government. So don't direct people, don't force someone. So the same thing is in urbanization and rural areas. Don't force people to go to cities, don't force people to go to rural areas. So that is the key.
We have one more question.
Wilmington University is a huge and intense work.
Pardon? Can you please speak?
Wilmington University, it's a huge and intense work, and then how they're making a policy to finance that. For example, poor countries and such as developing countries.
Yeah. It's a huge project. Obviously, I think the biggest thing is you have to do all upfront cost in terms of new city. You have to build infrastructure, and you don't know how many people are going to use it. This is just speculation.
Even if the developing countries, there's a cost of it is much more higher than the other developing countries. So how they're financing to build the new cities.
Yeah, in developing countries, obviously, like Saudi Arabia has oil wealth, they can do it well. In Pakistan, there was existing small town Gwadar, and now Pakistan has collaboration, and they have established a new port, and that's going to be a new city as well. And in Google, Canada, it happened in some cities. There are sometimes new capital cities, like in Brasilia is a new capital city in Brazil, and South Africa built. What's the name of that capital city? That South Africa built new city. No. Pretoria. That's a new city. So sometimes cities are built for capital seats. So they have a different architecture. They have different things. But generally, there is a debate on that. Some scholars recommend establishing new cities. Some think that's not a good idea. That just artificially create a city. Let it evolve through an organic process instead of putting infrastructure upfront and then looking for people to live in that city. So some people, Korea has done with its own wealth and some private investment as well, but still it's not. Incheon was a success story. Songdo is not a success story.
So now it's my turn. Share allow me. So two burning questions, and it will be your turn to ask the audience questions, at least one. So I'm a numbers person. So you mentioned civic capacity of the city. Yeah. Is that an indicator?
So people come up with these indicators like measuring social capital, bonds, these things, but it's a very tricky thing in terms of numbers and ranking. They do it, and what you can do is more through qualitative insights. So you can come up with some criteria, some sort of things. People have done these studies on measuring these things, like measuring social capital. And sometimes what people do, they try to find out connections between one organization and another organization, where employees are coming from, where they are working from. So there are some ways and means, but I personally think that's measuring these things quantitatively is something that it does not capture. What we call, sociologists have a nice term for that. They call it a thick description. You lose the thick description out of it then.
My other question, when we talk about this crime rate, it's kind of promoting entrepreneurship. Would be similar in conflict countries, like would you say Kabul or Damascus, when they recover, they will have more entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So I think that's sort of an excuse that many conflict countries have, that this conflicts are deterring entrepreneurs. That's fine. That's one variable, but that's not everything. If you look into their laws, regulations, and policies, they are not favorable. So more than crime, it's actually their laws and regulations which are hindering entrepreneurship. So I personally think that if you have more crimes, then probably you need to go more softer on regulations. But they go more harder on regulations. And then they say, we are unable to find entrepreneurs. We are unable to find foreign investment. When there was Iraq war going on, there were oil companies drilling wells in Iraq. When this ISIS things were happening, they were doing trading, they were doing all commercial oil activities, and companies were working with them. So private sector can find a way, they can find a solution to crime thing, but they can't find a solution to these regulatory things. So that's what it is important. Maybe if there is conflict, then again there is a way to create jobs. There is a way to